light of the devastating floods in Spain, which killed over 200 people and ruined many people's livelihoods, for the Europe conversation, I catch up with former EU Commissioner for the Environment and the Ocean, Vyrginijuos Sинкевичюс, who's now also the Green Party MEP for Lithuania. He says he's worried about the EU's ability to combat global warming with the European Parliament's shift to the right and far right of the political spectrum. Vyrginijuos Sинкевичюs, thanks very much for joining us on the Europe conversation. I'm going to start off because you just finished your 5 years as EU Commissioner for the Environment, Oceans and Fisheries. Can you reflect on that a little bit? How did you find, for example, Ursula von der Leyen as President of the European Commission?
Thank you very much for having me. Well, I think she showed a tremendous leadership, especially in crisis situations. She's been reactive. Ukraine, but also COVID. She was always there on the ground, very much involved, looking for solutions, trying to get decisions through. I would say that was very difficult 5 years, but in many of those cases, Commission under the leadership of Ursula von der Leyen found solutions. For example, going out of COVID, all member states together, I think that was a huge European moment. But the principle for the Union, that was amazing. Doesn't matter, your GDP is as size as Cyprus or a size of France or Germany, everyone got vaccines together and everyone got out of COVID together. So I hope that the next 5 years will be also about the commitments that were taken, with which we went ahead with, because you need to give clarity also to businesses, to stakeholders, to partners abroad. So therefore, even so that the House, of course, is much more right-wing leaning, but actually if you compare the coalition 5 years ago and coalition now, it's the same. It's EPP, SND and Renew. Three-party coalition, which in many cases can be supported by Greens, can be supported, of course, by the other groups, but I think that gives also a clarity that decisions that were taken, they need to be implemented.
But one of the issues that Ursula von der Leyen championed when she first arrived in 2019 was, of course, the Green Deal. And you were the only EU Commissioner from the Greens, and also you're the only Green MEP for Lithuania. But we've seen her and the EPP party, which led the Green Deal, roll back quite significantly on the issue of deforestation and also the nature restoration deal. So does that make you feel that things aren't as secure when Ursula von der Leyen meets these particular moments?
Well, I don't want to pin it on one person. I think Commission is a much broader body, which also heavily influenced also by the member states. I think what's extremely important is that when we arrive to a decision at the EU level, and it's way different. I was a minister also in Lithuania before arriving to Commission. It's way different from a national level. It's much more difficult because you have 27 member states with different interests, different cultural backgrounds, different understanding of priorities. And then you also have the parliament, which sometimes very split on some issues, sometimes very united. So to arrive to that decision, it takes you 2-3 years. It's never straightforward. So therefore, I think it's extremely important to respect those decisions because they were reached under the compromise.
But the EPP, which was interesting ahead of the European Parliament elections, essentially, denigrated the Green Deal and they sort of cast it off as the idea from the Greens. And the Greens had actually nothing to do with it.
I always look back and I think it's so funny that Greens had to pay the bill when they were not even part of the coalition. Yes, the elections did not go too well for the Greens. They were accused of the Green Deal, while it was, Commission had the largest number of commissioners were from EPP. If you look at the governments, the largest number of governments is EPP, and the biggest group in the House was EPP. But somehow they managed to turn it around and pretend that now they sort of, because even, the biggest protests were farmers. So if you actually even look back why they protested, the main thing was CAP, the new CAP, and the implementation of GAIX, which is this environmental pillar of the cap, which was always there. But the proposal came actually from the EPP commissioner. At that time, my colleague Phil Hogan was responsible for agriculture, and it was his proposal, which was finalized then by Janusz Wojciechowski, who is even ECR. So,
but on a very serious note, though, the fight against global warming is potentially interrupted by the makeup of the European Parliament, which is, as you mentioned earlier, moved to the far right, to MEPs that are not as committed, let's say, to global warming, the fight against that. I mean, we look at Valencia in Spain in the last couple of weeks, well in excess of 200 people dead, complete carnage, some of the worst rain this century. And it looks, if you have a group of parliamentarians that are sceptical around that, I mean, how does the EU then lead or at least tackle climate change?
That's correct. And unfortunately, we talk about it only when such huge disasters happen. And I think we all saw this devastation in Valencia, but you know, just a couple of years ago we could witness it here in Belgium, Germany, where again those floods taken many lives. Because you know, those disasters, they have happened before. It's not only because of the climate change, but one of the key pillars is preparedness, because we see that the scale and the intensity is larger and larger, and such disasters happens more and more often. So one of the key, for example, things when you talk about floods is the condition of the soil. So if soil is degraded, that means that the scale of disaster is going to be even greater. Second thing, of course, when you talk about the reaction afterwards, about the warning system, that's important. But that's not key if we don't have ecosystems in a good health. Unfortunately, you know, then we are only talking afterwards, how to mediate the disaster, how to help people, and of course the reaction always have to be immediate. But we need to ensure that we can deal with it in a way that, you know, people's life wouldn't be in danger. And in some areas in the EU, you can see that, for example, with forest fires, actually the preparedness work has given very good results.
Just moving on to Lithuania, because the situation in Ukraine is pretty dire. And we're coming into, again, winter, where Russia is targeting energy sources again, demoralising the citizens there and, of course, the army. Are you confident over the next 5 years the EU and Europe and the West has got what it takes, given how President Zelensky's victory plan has sort of, that the response has not been very strong to that?
I'm not comfortable about upcoming winter. Not even talking about 5 years. The upcoming winter will be the most difficult one. I think, you know, already, you know, rebuilding the heating, energy, electricity infrastructure was very difficult task, and Russia continued to do so. It's an open terrorism against innocent people, because, you know, it's not military infrastructure that is without water, without heating, without electricity. No, it's people, it's hospitals, it's schools, it's people's houses. And of course, they continue to do so this winter as well. We see that the capacities are limited. And the worst that, of course, there is a war fatigue. I mean, I cannot blame Ukrainians for war fatigue. You know, they've lost so many loved ones and close ones, family members, and they really defending fiercely. But, you know, US, Europe, I do not understand, you know, why there is war fatigue. We are not at war, we are not doing enough. And I hear more and more people, leaders, speaking about the war fatigue.
And because, I mean, we hear President Zelensky hugely critical of the fact that he can't preemptively strike against 10,000 North Korean troops readying to fight his own army because of the restrictions.
This is a unique thing that Russia managed actually to achieve in this war, and I think it will go into history books, that they separated their own society from the war very much. So, you know, they used prisoners, they used basically conscripts and so on, but taking them from, you know, faraway regions, not touching on bigger cities, Moscow and St. Petersburg. And now when they see that they really lack troops, they went and tapped into North Korea. And we don't know what numbers are there. While, you know, West, they seem like they are out of ideas helping Ukraine, and not only out of ideas, but actually limiting Ukraine of having, you know, basically being fully operational. And with this limitation, still Ukraine managed to achieve a lot.
Because, of course, coming from Lithuania, you have in living memory the experience of brutal Russian occupation. Do you think there's an appreciation around that in Europe? Because you were talking about war fatigue, and like, you know, in Lithuania, you're saying, well, hold on a minute, we actually can't afford to have war fatigue. What do you think the consequences for the countries like Lithuania and Europe would be if Ukraine does lose?
So we don't know where Russia stops. You know, they said they will never attack Ukraine. They have, you know, broken many rules before, and you don't know where the appetite ends. With now the military capabilities that they have built, with the number of troops that they have, you just don't know, you know, depending on the ending of this war, what they're going to do next. And maybe Putin will be tempted to challenge NATO. You know, very often NATO, by trying, you know, and history shows that, you know, by trying to avoid war, you end up in war, but you end up in a situation where you completely unprepared. So at least we have to be ready, so that he and his troops, generals, military would not be tempted to test our defense capabilities.
Okay, Viriginis Singevicius, thank you very much for joining us on the Europe Conversation.
My pleasure.